Good afternoon, everybody, and thank you so much for joining us for today's community conversation. We will be getting started very shortly. We are just waiting for a few other people to connect to the webinar. While we're waiting, I'd like to say hello out to everybody who's watching on Facebook. We are simulcasting this webinar to the NASW-NJ Facebook page where people will be able to view it there. And if you are watching on Facebook and have questions for the presenters, you may put your question into the Facebook comments and we'll translate them over to the Zoom webinar proper. So welcome everybody. It looks like we're all connected. And thank you for joining us for today's community conversation entitled The Not So Hidden Costs of Aging, the Importance of Long-Term Care Planning. And I'm very happy to be here today with Cathy Rowe, the Executive Director of New Jersey Advocates for Aging Well, who is going to be our special guest moderator for this event, and she'll be introducing our esteemed panelists very shortly. Just before we begin, a couple of housekeeping things. I do want to remind everybody that this webinar is being recorded for future use. It's going to be available on the NASW New Jersey YouTube channel, and we will also be sending a link out to the recording to everybody who's registered for this event. So if you have friends or colleagues that wanted to attend and couldn't, the recording will be available for you to share with them afterwards. There are also some slides. If you'd like to view those, you can access them on the Eventbrite page for this webinar, or we will also send them out to you in an email after the presentation. Some of the presenters may be speaking directly from the slides. I believe Lynn's slides are just there for background information for you. So if you are able to access those on the Eventbrite page and have questions for Lynn about those slides, you can put all your questions in the chat here on the Zoom webinar. The way the format today will work, I'm going to turn things over to Cathy shortly, who will introduce our panelists. Each of our panelists are going to speak from their area of expertise, and then we're going to have time for Q&A at the end of the presentation. So with all that said, thanks again so much for joining us today. I'm going to switch us over to speaker view, so only the person speaking is going to be on screen at this time. And let's get things started. So Cathy, thanks so much for helping us arrange this panel today in recognition of Long-Term Care Month. And please take it away.
Thank you, Jeff. And this is the second webinar that Jeff and I are doing together. It's a really great way to merge our two groups because there is a huge overlap with social work and aging. So we're really happy to partner on this. And I didn't even know it until Jeff told me, but October is Long-Term Care Planning Month. And we think it's really important to have this webinar today and our panelists, because this is something that people don't tend to plan for. They don't think they're going to need it. They might not need it. And then all of a sudden they find themselves in a, emergent situation where they need to make plans, they need care, and they don't know how to do it. So we're going to look at this from three ways today. We're going to talk about what long-term care is and what that might entail in your future. And Teresa Edelston will be our first speaker. She's the Senior Vice President at Partnerships Transforming Health at the New Jersey Hospital Association. And then we have Thomas Bain from the Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services, the New York region, which includes New Jersey. He's going to talk about what Medicare does and does not cover, because many people will be surprised that Medicare does not cover most long-term care needs. And then we have Lynn Rockwell from Rockwell Financial, who's going to talk about exploring your options, the financing of this, the insurance options, and how to plan ahead for this financial need. Again, it's something that hopefully we will never need, but many of us do. And we need to prepare upfront. We need to prepare in advance. So with that, I'm going to turn this over to Teresa first. Thank you very much, Teresa. You can take it away.
Thank you so much, Cathy and Jeff, for inviting me to participate this afternoon, and looking forward to hearing some questions and having a great conversation. So Jeff, you can go to the next slide and the one after that. So as the title of my previous slide said, long-term care is so much more than nursing homes. And I just want to say from the outset, long-term care can affect someone at really any age. We think mostly about older adults when we talk about long-term care needs, but really anyone with a chronic illness or even a sudden catastrophic kind of event can have a need for long-term care services of various types. So what you see on the slide in front of you is a depiction of really a continuum or a spectrum of what long-term care includes. And there are even some things missing from this photo. On the low acuity end or the low need end, you see independent living and home care. And kind of in the middle, you see a lot of different types of services. Adult daycare, senior centers could be on that lower end acuity spectrum, assisted living, which is ALF, skilled nursing facility or nursing home is kind of in that middle to almost high acuity or high need. And then in the middle, you have a circle that says PACE. Well, what is PACE? PACE is the Program of All-Inclusive Care for the Elderly, which is a community-based option for people who need a lot of assistance, but can maintain independent living. So it's a really great option for someone with a lot of chronic disease needs, but who has a stable living environment and family support, particularly at the time that they enroll in PACE. And then on the far end of the spectrum, you see IRF. Well, what is IRF? IRF are rehabilitation hospitals. Most often, people who have had a stroke or a hip replacement or some kind of spinal cord injury, things of that nature, often will need a rehabilitation hospital after they've been in an acute care hospital so that they can have an intensive rehabilitation and recovery experience. And then up at the brighter pink circle is LTAC. That's a long-term acute care hospital. And generally speaking, those settings serve people who have had significant illness, been in acute care for a while, and need a pretty intensive level of care for a longer period of time. Not in an acute care hospital because they're now stable from a medical standpoint, but there really isn't somewhere else for them to be treated for a really extensive period of time with the goal of going home. And then you see our friends in the acute care hospital, which we hope that you don't need very often, but when you do, that's the place you go for intensive medical treatment when you have an illness, a condition, an accident, or an incident of some kind. And then really all the way on the higher end is hospice, which is more of a service that you would utilize at the end of life when treatment is no longer really beneficial and the person elects or chooses to stop all curative services and really have comfort measures in place. Another thing I would say is all along this spectrum of care, it is entirely possible that you might need palliative care. Palliative care is not the same as hospice or end-of-life care. Palliative care is intended to be supportive services, no matter where you might be on this spectrum, to help you live your best life, best independent life, and have the most dignity in the process. So it's important to remember that really anywhere along the spectrum of care, you may at times need comfort measures, supportive care, and other things that constitute palliative care, including social work assistance, chaplaincy assistance, and just about anything else you can think, nursing assistance that might be supportive of you. So important to keep in mind that long-term care really runs a very broad range and can include any of us at any time when we are confronting an illness or a condition. So, Jeff, you can go to the next one. So just to bring home the point a little bit more sharply, long-term care needs can vary and can change all along the spectrum of our lives as we live them. The needs cover everything from needing help with things like shopping or housekeeping or doing your laundry or paying your bills, all the way up to total physical and emotional care, and just about everything in between. It is really important to recognize that social and spiritual needs are also a part of this continuum. And by social needs, I mean things like being able to interact with people and do things that you have in common, whether it's a book club or playing mahjong or anything else that you really enjoy, watching movies, TV shows, that sort of thing. And while we don't always all have a particular religion or faith that we subscribe to, we all have some need for spiritual support. And it's important not to ignore that as part of long-term care services. In long-term care, we have lots of informal resources as well as formal resources in the community. For example, informal resources can include synagogues, churches, mosques, senior centers, book clubs, friends groups. Those are all informal forms of support. And then you have more formal resources, things like adult daycare, home care, nursing homes, assisted living, and the others that we've talked about. But the informal supports and the informal services can really help prevent the need for hospitalization or nursing home care if they're accessed early on in the process. So it's important, and you'll hear Lynn talk about this, it's important to think about this and try to plan for it so that you have what you need at the time that an illness or another condition might come your way. It's important to also recognize the role of area agencies on aging in communities. These are county-based in New Jersey. Every county has one, and they're a great source of information for what's available in your particular community or area. The same is true of the boards of social service. Many times we think of boards of social services only coming into play when there is a need for, say, Medicaid, but they also offer a lot of other information and education. You can also rely pretty heavily on your hospital's community education department, especially with respect to education around specific conditions or needs that you may have, like orthopedic care or falls prevention and things of that nature. And don't discount your religious organizations or local health departments. They're also great resources. Many times they run things like flu vaccination clinics and other important preventative screenings like high blood pressure and diabetes screenings and things like that. So those are all ways to learn information about what's available in your community. And I would recommend for most families to have some of these organizations on speed dial because you just never know when you might need them. So Jeff, that concludes my comments. I'm going to hand it back to Cathy.
Thank you. And thank you for making it so clear that we're talking about a wide range of services. We're not talking just about nursing home. And in fact, most people will never be in a nursing home. I think it's 2 to 2.5% of residents in New Jersey ever use a nursing home. So it is really important to emphasize the broad range of what we mean by that. And then we're going to move on to Thomas. And Thomas, I don't want to put you in the spot of bringing the bad news because Medicare does cover a range and quite a few long-term care services, but not what most people probably think. So if you can tell us what Medicare and Medicaid do cover and what they don't cover, so we understand the difference, I will turn this over to you.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Cathy. Hello, everyone. Hello to all that are joining via Facebook. And thank you, Jeff, for inviting me to be on this panel. I myself am trained as a social worker, so I love to do events with NASW New Jersey and reconnect. And I also want to thank my fellow panelists, Teresa and Lynn. Teresa, you did a great job of laying down what this world of long-term care can look like and what the needs are. And as Cathy said, I wouldn't say I wouldn't put it as bad news, but it's just educational and removing misinformation. Many people do not know what they need to know until they need to know it. And that comes very clear with things like long-term care. You may yourself be thinking about the future, or your parents or your grandparents, and it is very likely that Medicare will not cover the services you imagine that it does. It covers services for very specific instances. So I just want to take a step back for those of you that may not be in the health insurance world, to kind of break it down a little bit further. And of course, everyone's circumstance is specific to them. So you should really follow up with all those great resources that Teresa mentioned who can help you navigate this on a one-on-one. I don't think you'll learn everything you need to know today, but you will get started on a journey. So if somebody has Medicare, that means that likely they are over the age of 65, they have a long-term disability, or they have a condition like end-stage renal disease. So that's how people qualify for the Medicare program. In addition, people can receive their Medicare either in what we call original Medicare or traditional Medicare, which is the fee-for-service model, or via Medicare Advantage, which is private health insurance that's coordinating your Medicare for you. This distinction again becomes important when you're thinking about your long-term care needs. And I'm just really glad that Teresa really broke down what this world of long-term care can look like, because I think people don't really understand that there are home-based or community-based services. And I always think that PACE is one of those hidden gems that people don't know enough about. So I'm glad that you mentioned it. I think people have a kind of a conception of what a nursing home could look like, but there's a wide array of services. So in terms of what Medicare will cover, Medicare, either original Medicare or Medicare Advantage, have to cover the same base services. And these are really focused on medical necessity, so medical need. And this is kind of how the program was developed, the history of our medical system in this country. And so what they will cover is if you have been in a hospital for 3 days and then continue to need services, medical necessity services, in a long-term care facility. So I just want to say that the way that you access Medicare covered services in long-term care is really via the hospital. And that opens the door to long-term care services for you. And then again, it's not an infinite amount of coverage either. So there are specific numbers of days that Medicare will cover your needs in a long-term care kind of facility or modality. So for the first 20 days, Medicare will pay the full cost of all of your services and you pay nothing. Then it shifts from day 21 through 100. Well, Medicare will pay everything, but you will also be paying a co-insurance for those covered services. And then beyond 100 days, Medicare will pay nothing and you will pay the full cost of the covered services. So I think that's the shocker for people. After 100 days, I have the costs now. I don't think people really understand that. And so I'll just make a brief caveat around Medicare Advantage. Because these are private health insurance plans, you will need to call them or check their website to see exactly what they do or do not cover. They have to cover the same amount of services as original Medicare, but they can cover more. And I mention this because in recent years, the Medicare Advantage plans have been increasing the services that they cover that you wouldn't traditionally think of as covered by Medicare. Things like transportation to medical services, or even nutritious meals after a hospitalization. So really, you'll have to follow up with that plan directly. So again, there are things that Medicare covers. It doesn't cover everything that you imagined. And I think this is where sometimes people start to think about, what does Medicaid cover? So just to refresh for everyone's memory, Medicaid is based upon people's income and often their assets. So I think Lynn is going to kind of dive into this a little bit more about the limitations of both the Medicaid and the Medicare programs in this realm. But Medicaid will pay for long-term care in a way that people may more traditionally conceptualize. Is that the best thing to plan for? I think Lynn will give you some ideas or questions around that. So I think that's really the key takeaways that I wanted to impress upon you. I know you can't remember everything, but really Medicaid Medicare will cover very limited. You access that service through going to the hospital, and Medicaid will cover much more, but that again is income-based and asset-based. And I just want to quickly remind everyone that we are currently in the open enrollment period, so people can make decisions about what their coverage will look like for next year. So that window is until December 7th, and coverage will begin on January 1st. So you can begin to look at different coverage options that best suit you or your loved one's needs. And I just wanted to share some good news because, you know, I think Cathy gave me the charge of sharing bad news, but I always love to share good news as well. No, it's great. You know, because of the Inflation Reduction Act, insulin now is covered at $35 per month. This is really big news for everyone. And this starts this kind of shopping period, if you will, for open enrollment for coverage beginning January 1st. In addition, for approved immunizations, there will no longer be co-payments starting on January 1st. So this is all just really great news that I like to share with you all. But I think I covered a lot of the basics. I'm going to put some resources in the chat. But again, think about all those resources that Teresa mentioned to you. Please do use them. We have a great partner at the federal level in the Administration for Community Living, which supports a lot of this work as well. So I'm just going to pop some resources in there, but I just wanted to give you those high level takeaways, and I'll turn it back to you, Cathy. Thanks so much.
Thank you. I have a couple of questions before we move on to Lynn, but you know, there's been a lot of talk about Medicare being able to negotiate drug prices.
Yep.
To get that benefit, you do need to sign up for Part D,
right,
or be an Advantage plan that covers prescription, correct?
Correct.
And
so
for the insulin, do you also need to sign up for Part D or no?
Yeah, so the insulin actually, I believe, is under both Medicare and Medicaid going forward. So it can have some variation depending on people needs. I don't think it's a mandate for the private sector. I think that was one of the stumbling blocks what Congress was trying to do.
Right.
But under Medicare, if you are enrolled in a Part D plan or a Medicare Advantage plan that covers your Part D drugs, then the $35 is correct.
Right. And someone had asked for more detail, like what you put in the chat. There's Medicare.gov. There's the Medicare and You resource book that I know a new version's out. So there's a lot. And my favorite is there's actually an app for Medicare to see what's covered.
That is right. What's covered? That's the app. Yep. It's in English and Spanish, and you can see what's covered under Medicare. It's really a great app.
Very handy.
Very handy. And we do have a booklet that's just focused on long-term care that I'm going to put the direct link in the chat as well. So you can have all those resources.
Okay, thank you. So now we're going to bring in Lynn Rockwell, and Lynn is a financial planner. And Lynn, I know you have a lot to cover. And I know that your main message is that people do need to start planning early for this. So I'm just going to turn it over to you. And go ahead. You're still on mute. You're still, let me see if I can unmute you.
Okay, thank you.
There you go.
Okay, first of all, I wanted to say thank you to Cathy and Jeff for helping me coordinate everything, and to my esteemed colleagues who I will be reaching out to for, hopefully we can work together. That, you know, our first priority is to get anyone free or low costing help primarily. But out of the three of us, I think I'm the biggest rainy day. And that is, first of all, it does cost more, but I want to say long-term care is affordable. What isn't affordable is paying for nursing home, assisted living, etc., out of your pocket. Okay, long-term care is one of the few insurances, the majority of them, that once you go and claim, you stop paying. Okay, without getting into too much detail, as Cathy said, we like to say, everyone, is the younger you are, the healthier you are. Not only will your premiums cost less, but you would have a bigger choice of products. We used to start out with maybe 5, 6, 7 types of companies with one or two products. Now we have various products. I would have to, you know, keep going, that I can pretty much cover a lot of people with conditions. But however, the best care is when you're healthy and you have your pick of what suits you and your family. Okay. When I say it's affordable, is we do not build you a product that we think you should have. We build your policy around what your financial and familial situation is. If all you can afford is home care, then that's all we would build around. Okay. My goal is to have my clients not have to go to nursing home. Okay. And as Teresa said, who is in nursing home is it's a shorter time. And actually the age of nursing home residents is coming down because as she said, there are people, unfortunately, that are younger, whether it be an accident, a stroke, etc., that their families cannot take care of them, or they do not have a policy that would pay for it, and they do have to go to nursing homes. That is your last hope. With all the differences we've come up with is assisted living, daycare, no limit except for whatever your policy, how big it is. But home care is what I stress the most. Okay. Having a plan in place, I think as Cathy said, just like your retirement planning, it should be part of that. Because the first thing is, yes, it can eat up most of your assets, depending on how long you've been there. But I like to also bring in how much emotionally it brings in everybody in your family. If you're, first of all, it brings your independence yourself. You choose where you want to be taken care of and how. But as far as the family goes, it trickles to everybody. Our numbers have come in that spouses that are taking care of other spouses seem to get sicker at a younger age because of all the stress. It also affects children. I'm sure we all know somebody who, there's a big family, but it usually winds up only one or two children wind up with the care. This later on, I've seen bring rifts in families, etc. And most of us parents really don't want our children doing the basic needs like bathing and showering, etc. We'd rather have our family come over for fun, for a nice visit. And that's where long-term care comes in. It doesn't take the place of the social and your family, but what it does is make it easier for everybody. I had one client that said, to be honest, the best thing my mother did for me was to buy long-term care. And that's because it allowed us to have a better relationship, me to be able to see my kids' games and not upset their lives, my spouse, and my job. And we all know in this economy for years now, most of us are in two-income families. So who is going to give up at that point? Who's going to give up their job? Okay, who can afford to give up their job without affecting the rest of the family? And like Cathy said, I could go on for how long you guys want to be here. But it's very detailed. We do not spend a quick time on this. We show you the basics of what you think you can afford and how, and we show you the different ones, different policies that pertain and that you are healthy enough for, okay? And then we help you choose the do's and don'ts, the bad and the good of every single policy, because there is bad and good. And what might cover Cathy, Teresa might think she wants something else, okay? Jeff might want something else, or Ted. And you know what? We can, usually, as long as they're healthy enough, there are policies that we can coordinate and build. There's no cookie cutter, build around each person. Okay, but my biggest takeaway here is not only is that it is affordable, okay, to make a plan affordable for you, is that it is different than anything you've heard of 20 years ago. There are plans from 20 years ago that people say, oh, it didn't cover anything. It didn't cover assisted living. Well, those plans, unfortunately, assisted living was not even around then. The newer plans cover everything that pretty much your doctor says. Some of them will even build ramps in your house, etc. Okay. And like I said, without getting into too much detail, because I deal with people's money and I also deal with people's surroundings emotionally, etc., it's much better to plan and have a policy in place than not to have a policy and have to liquidate assets that would then encourage more problems for your spouse and family. And without getting on, unless somebody wants to see part 2, 3, 4, and 5, which I'll give you if you call, that's basically long-term care, the myths that are gone, that are really not there anymore. It is affordable. Yes, I can show people a policy that would cover you forever, but most of you do not need a policy forever. Right now, our average between women especially is 3 to 4 years of care. It could be home care, assisted living, whatever you choose. Okay. And unfortunately, whatever condition happens to be, causing this care. Okay. But we work first with Medicare, Medicaid, and everyone else to see what we can get you for free for low cost. And then we build it on top of that. So basically, I'll turn it over to Cathy, just doing a very basic overview of long-term care. As I said, I could spend days on it, and fortunately for everybody, we don't have those. But so I just want to say, please do not listen to what everybody else says, but get the facts yourself, because for each case, it's different, and a different cost and a different plan.
Thank you. And we did all just give people a kind of an appetizer into this. We have the basics, and we do want to open this up for questions so we can get into more of the details and the real life scenarios that you're facing. But I want to start, somebody put this in the chat, and I can't remember which of you touched on it briefly, but there is, there's long-term care for the individual, but then there's respite care, which is for the caregiver. And can one of you talk a little bit explain what respite care is?
Cathy, I'd be happy to kick it off, and then anyone else certainly feel free to jump in. There are different forms of respite care available for caregivers. Usually the most common situation is the individual who needs the care goes to either an assisted living facility or nursing facility for a very short time under a specific arrangement for a few days or maybe a week for their family caregiver to have a break. Sometimes that break is related to the caregiver needing to take care of something medical of their own. Sometimes it's to take a short vacation and just have some time to recharge. So most assisted living facilities offer respite care services. Generally, these are done out of pocket. Medicaid will cover some respite care. The same is true in the nursing facility. I think there are probably some home care arrangements that could be made for respite in the home, but I hear that a lot less frequently than facility-based respite.
But to build on that, yes, most of our policies or the different types do provide 30 days of respite care that would be paid for.
Okay.
So on top of that, so working together as a team, we can really help everybody.
Okay. We have a question that when you have a long-term care policy that is for let's say for 3 years, then the patient survives longer than 3 years. What do you do if you have a policy but there's not enough time in the policy? What is the next option?
Well, first, when we might say a 3-year policy, And you're really dealing with a pool of money in that policy. If you took the max amount that you have in that policy per month, it would only last 3 years. Normally, most people do not start with home care, which costs less than a facility. So of course, then we can extend the policy into 4th or 5th year. Okay.
Okay.
And normally first you usually do start out with family care. And we had, while an elimination period, which we try to keep at a good point that you can use it, but not right away, because we want to keep the premiums down. Okay. What we call, we'd rather have a short policy, meaning 2, 3, 4 years, that has a very big benefit. And let me just use an instance. If you have a 10, like I said, it builds over the years that you buy it. And it builds compounded or simple, it has no market fluctuations. And so what you start off with, hopefully you will not need for 20, 30 years, will be a bigger substantial pot of money to access. So in that example, if you had $10,000 a month set aside when you finally use it, policy, and you're only using $4,000 for home care, of course, that's $6,000 in most cases, depending on which policy, it will stay in the pool and just extend everything. After there's a 5-year look back in New Jersey, which means people start to give away assets. Usually you do not, I work with a lot of elder care attorneys. I'm not an attorney, but you want to talk to an attorney before you give away your house or anything like that, because there's very many repercussions, not only tax-wise for the children, but also the autonomy and the ownership of the house. Okay. Then what we'll do is we will try to stress and work with attorneys that will leave enough assets that if you went beyond the 3 or 4 years to get you to the 5, so that after 5 years, yes, you might have assets that are out of the state, but you can still use them, or then you qualify and go to for Medicaid. If I apply for TIM, right, to Medicaid, and they will look at 5 years back, and there's nothing the person gave away, therefore they will qualify quicker, correct? Yeah.
Okay.
So we do work with attorneys and everybody else to have a plan in place to at least reach those 5 years, so that Medicaid doesn't knock on your door and start taking assets. Sorry. But,
Okay.
we try to plan around that.
Okay.
And I think in terms of specifically Medicare, again, this is much more limited than perhaps you would think. It's really connected to hospice care, the respite benefits. So Medicare Advantage plans could cover it because they can always expand their services to cover more, but I'm just less familiar with it.
Okay. And I'll put in the chat a great resource for people interested in hospice and palliative care in New Jersey, the New Jersey the Goals of Care Coalition. I had to go look up their website, and I'll put it in just a moment. We have a question that says, can you talk about the buy down with residential placements? And I'm not sure exactly what's meant by that.
I'm thinking they mean spend down, or Teresa, you're going to go.
No, I wasn't going to say anything. I was just going to say, I think they're talking about spend down.
Spend down, right.
Okay.
Yeah. So
So
I can
tell
get,
us about-
I can
yeah.
get started, but I would appreciate if Lynn or Teresa would jump in, as I'm not an expert on NJ Medicaid. But so and we were just talking about the 5-year look back, right? So there's lots of things related to Medicaid as well. So we talked about Medicare quite a bit. Medicaid is what a lot of people turn to for long-term care needs, but there are specific things that you really should be thinking about in terms of Medicaid, because Medicaid is an income and asset-based program. And it's really a program that was originally set up for some of the most vulnerable populations across this nation. But we do have a kind of gap, if you will, in terms of public health insurance programs covering these services. So a lot of people have to look towards things like Medicaid. And so in order to qualify for the Medicaid programs, people look to bring their income and asset level down. And there is either, looking back 5 years, that's kind of the timeline that they're looking at. So anything before then, I'm sure Lynn can tell you all the different options that are available. So that 5-year window, or to bring down your income to meet the threshold for Medicaid and thus qualify for these services. Lynn or Teresa, Cathy, I don't know if you want to add anything else to that. But it gets kind of complicated pretty fast.
Yeah. There is a 5-year look back. So Medicaid will look back at your assets. And if you have given away anything, you have to have a certain limit as spoken. Now, if there's anything over that limit, they will look back at not only what you have above that limit that you own still, or that you've given away. And I don't know the formula, but technically Medicaid has a formula that for every day that, you are kind of punished for every day, or fined for every day of the money you still have above that line. So if Medicaid, and I'm just using numbers because I really don't know, just say the care is $5,000 a day and you have 100,000 over what they allow, then 5,000 into 100,000, they will make you pay all of that out of your pocket before you qualify for Medicaid. And that's what we mean by the 5-year look back. So anything, but if you give something away, they count that too as if you already have it, kept it. And they look through checkbooks, banks. They're the best at looking at what you gave away. And it doesn't go along with, you're allowed to give away $1 million a year or whatever. Those are other rules. These are strictly for long-term care, Medicaid, Medicare.
No, I'm sorry. That was my question. I was sort of asking, I've heard where people are able to, and I may not be using the correct term, but they're able to stay in like a residential placement, and then like for a couple years, and then the fee drops, or either they stay for free or something. That's what I was referring to. Like, I don't know. I don't have the correct terminology, I guess. But I know I have heard it from multiple families where they sort of pay the first couple of years for, and I don't know if that's assisted living or whatever, but then somehow the fee drops if they stay like 2 or 3 years, or.
So I think what you may be referring to is some long-term care organizations require a certain amount of private pay capability to come in as a new admission. And then after that period of time, you've spent your private funds, then you go through the Medicaid eligibility process. So it's not free. Because the government is starting to pay for the future long-term care stay. And so you've basically exhausted your private funds and then qualify for Medicaid for the rest of your stay. So free, I wouldn't call it free because we all pay for it through our taxes, right? So I think that's probably what you're referring to, though.
All right, thank you.
I know also there are some long-term care facilities that if they, like Parker Life is an example, they have an endowment so that if somebody goes through all of their resources, then they might have other, a charity fund for someone who has basically outlived their resources.
Yeah, Parker is an anomaly, though. I would not put that out there as as even a possibility in most instances.
Okay.
And you
A
could
good
really
anomaly.
Yes, good anomaly.
And you could really stay anywhere, home, assisted living, nursing home, and actually home is less expensive depending on your situation. But you still have to do that 5 years, anything that counts against you. And that is going to come out of, if not your pocket, your family's pocket. So as Teresa said, and Cathy said, there's no free. It's coming from somewhere before Medicaid will kick in.
Mhm. I want to ask the three of you because one of you had mentioned that some organizations even do ramps or adapt your home. You know, there is more of an emphasis of staying at home. It's more affordable, but it's also, there are just more services you can do at home now than there were 25 years ago. So it's more practical in a lot of ways. But the cost of adapting their home can be daunting. Can you tell us what, is it long-term care or Medicare or Medicaid, or who can people look to for paying for the cost of adapting a home so that someone can live at home instead of living at a long-term care facility?
I can get us started. Oh, Teresa, did you want to go?
No, go ahead.
So there are things that Medicare Advantage plans are covering to make homes better places for people to live currently. But as you were talking, I was also thinking about people sometimes forget about the VA or the veterans covered benefits.
True.
And
Yes.
a lot of people don't even consider all that the VA does cover. So they do cover some of those home modifications like bars in the bathtub and things like that. So if you do have somebody that you're working with or you yourself are a veteran, I would highly recommend that you reach out to the VA to see what they can complement and provide.
I would add to that very good suggestion that PACE organizations, because they receive a certain amount of money for each of their participants, and they have to manage all of the needs of the participant in the community. So they have the flexibility to use some of the payment they're receiving under Medicare and Medicaid usually to do home modifications. So everything from building a ramp to adding an air conditioning unit or anything else you might need to be able to be safe and independent at home. I also think there are sometimes small grant programs at the local level, and the Area Agency on Aging is often very helpful in identifying some of those sources of private funding.
Just to add on top of that, and I think what Tim and Teresa said is first always go to where can you get care for less, something to help you for less. But if you need more, there's depending on the policy, it gives you a certain amount of money if you needed to install a new tub. Because we know that sometimes there's a lot, as Cathy said, or sometimes minimal changes that need to be done to keep you at home. And as Cathy said it, the reason people want to stay home not only is because it's familial, it's less expensive, but on top of that, we found that people are happier and even stay healthier longer. And because like when our great grandparents were in nursing homes, there really wasn't much of a choice if you couldn't take care, if the family couldn't take care of you. Now there's so many different levels, and home care is really where, especially after the COVID, we've asked, and there was a slide, one of the slides there says, I believe over 60% choose home, and if you can't stay home, it's only because you might have, digressed in your condition, but we try to keep people home as long as possible.
And I just wanted to add briefly, I didn't make this explicit, but I just wanted to underscore that people can be enrolled in Medicare and Medicaid at the same time. And so
Yes.
that allows for more flexibility, as Teresa was mentioning, to what those what that money is used for. So you have PACE as one example. In many states like New Jersey, Medicaid is largely a managed care organization. So they also have flexibility in what they can use the money for. So I just wanted to make sure people know you could have Medicare, you can have Medicaid, but you can also have both.
And can you elaborate a little more on what that is it's dually eligible, correct?
Dually eligible, correct. So that would just mean that you meet the thresholds of both programs. So to qualify for Medicare, again, many people, turning 65, that's their criteria to get in the door, or a long-term disability. And then if you also have the income and asset eligibility, you would then get Medicaid. And historically, those programs did not coordinate very well, but we did establish an office to improve the coordination between these programs. And we're seeing a lot of interesting innovations happening. So I hope to see more of that in the future.
Great. Are there other questions, or have you gotten any questions that you see, Jeff?
I just want to add on top of what Tim said, is that if you qualify for Medicaid, the majority of the money, Tim, still goes to a nursing home eventually. You are not always at the nursing home that's down the street. It could be, you know, a long ways. And I've seen veteran homes that are gorgeous, great care. And then I've seen other homes nearby, I mean, veteran facilities that are just complete opposite. So really, that's what I think long-term care does, is give you the independent choices, you know. And if you go to a facility that won't take Medicaid, but they'll take long-term care or cash, that's a whole different situation, unfortunately.
Okay. And then somebody asked, with dual eligible, is Medicare primary and Medicaid secondary, like a split, or how does that work?
Oh man, I'm gonna mess it up real quick. I've had a long day. I think Medicaid always pays second, right? So Medicare pays first. Let me just double check. Teresa,
I think it depends. It depends
depends
on the service. You know,
Okay,
if
yeah.
it's something Medicare covers, then Medicare would be first.
Right, I think
If
that's
it's
right.
not- Yeah, if it's not something Medicare covers, then Medicaid would be first.
Yeah, that's right.
And a lot of times they're sharing because they both cover.
Mhm.
And in that case, Medicare would be first, Medicaid would be second. So it very much depends upon what service you're using and what the coverage requirements are.
I have something to add to that. From my understanding and here in the state of New Jersey, the tenants here in the building, when they have a dual complete plan, when the Medicare and Medicaid are put together, the HMO becomes a primary. So like when they go to the doctor, they no longer have to show the Medicare and Medicaid card. They just show the HMO card and that's it.
Yes, in a Medicare Advantage situation,
It's a
or in a DSNP, dual eligible special needs plan, where both Medicare and Medicaid benefits are provided, then yes, they would have a single card with their DSNP plan name on it. And that's all that they would have to present to the whatever provider they're using.
Thanks for bringing that up. Other questions or examples you'd like to share?
Ask,
Time for one or two more. Go ahead.
I would like to ask Lynn, you mentioned a couple of times about policy. Are you talking about what kind of policy you're talking about? Thank you.
Long-term care insurance, which can basically, there's two types. There's what we call standalone, okay, which has built in it, and we kind of call it, to be honest, use it or lose it, but there's now built-in protections that it will protect your assets for your family and spouse, so that you don't have to spend down all the way to get Medicaid. The second type is, some people requested a couple of years ago, 5 years ago, that they wanted combination policies like life and long-term care in one policy, or a fixed annuity and long-term care in two policies. Now, depending on your health, number one, that would say which one or choices you have. But while I have used both, and it's really up to the client because the affordability, but also too is which benefits are better for each one. Some have shared care, where meaning if I have a spouse on the policy with the other spouse, and one needs more care than the other, they can dip into their pool of the other person's policy for benefits to keep them at home or wherever they are. So it's insurance, but it's varied. There's probably about 100 different products. And one we call hybrid and one is standalone. Those are basically the two types, and then they get divided from there.
So you're talking about private insurance from the private sector.
Yes, it's sponsored by the law, we only use A-rated companies. And either it's just insurance, right? It would be on top of Medicare, Medicaid, Teresa, what you could provide or whatever you guys wouldn't provide. We pick up it then.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Well,
Jeff, do you see other questions out there?
yeah, we're just about at time. Do we have a time for one more question if somebody wants to ask real quickly? Okay, well, if not, thank you so much, Cathy and Teresa, Lynn, and Thomas for being here today. This was a really informative presentation. And as you said, it's just kind of scratching the surface of what there is to prepare for long-term care. But this was great. And as we said at the outset, we will be sending out a copy of the recording of this presentation to everybody that registered, as well as the links to the slides, plus all of the links that were put up in the chat are going to come to you via email as well. So don't worry about missing anything. And also, just to remind you, coming up in November, NASW New Jersey has more great community conversations planned that you may be interested in. On November 10th, we'll be having a discussion with folks from the organization Bridge to Balance about how DBT skills can be used to benefit caregivers of those who are impacted by mental illness. And then on November 15th, we'll be doing a program about teaching philanthropy to teens in recognition of Philanthropy Awareness Month. And then November 21st, Thanksgiving week, we're happy to be hosting Hillary Weaver, who is a recently nominated and named to the NASW Pioneers. And Hillary will be speaking to us about understanding trauma and resilience in the lives of contemporary Native Americans. All those presentations are free, coming your way in November. And if you're looking for CEUs, we have our 6th CEU Healthcare Social Work Symposium coming up on November 3rd, which is going to focus on the healthcare needs of LGBTQ+ individuals. And you can find a registration for all that information on the NASW New Jersey website, NASW-NJ.org, on our events calendar. So again, thank you all very much for joining us. Have a great Friday and a great weekend, and we'll see you all soon. Take care, everyone.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.